Hey, everybody. We got another guest this week. This is Dr. DJ Kinney. Now, if you've been on the Soviet Empire Facebook group, I've posted his blog or his podcast a couple of times. I can't tell you how excited I am to have him on here. I don't even remember how I came across your podcast, but I really mainlined it from almost beginning to end while I was doing some projects around the house. I was doing a backsplash for the kitchen, and so I had plenty of time to just sit and listen. But he does an amazing job of kind of explaining Cold War history. His style is unique. I haven't seen anybody else like him. And most importantly, for my viewers and listeners and readers, he's the opposite of this channel. Okay, if you go to his channel, you'll see high quality production values. You'll see he's got an amazing voice and great equipment. And over here, I'm Dollar Store Alex, and I've got I sound like somebody strangling a cat. So please welcome my guest, Dr. DJ Kinney.
Well, hello, and thank you for those kind words. And you sound just fine.
I swear my real speaking voice is like 2 octaves lower, but whenever I turn on a camera, I just pitch right up, and I can't stop myself from doing it.
Yeah, well, I always try to record early in the morning when I have a good radio voice, solid radio voice. Yeah,
that makes sense. I'm really pigeonholed into the this time on a Tuesday evening because my wife has piano lessons, and so I have the house to myself. So why don't you give us a few words about your podcast?
Sure. The Cold War Vault is the name of the podcast. It's it's coming into its 3rd year and a new incarnation. Now, if you're familiar with it, it's been a little while, but I've been retooling it, and there's going to be a lot more visual content, and new episodes are coming out this week as we speak. I'm fairly excited about that. The show itself is a scholarly look at history without it being a drag, I think.
Yeah, and I think I would not have chosen scholarly as an adjective, but when you say it, I can see it absolutely 100%. But as you said, it's not a drag. It's very entertaining. You really keep it moving. You really
I guess
history alive.
I mean scholarly in that I hope I use sources that are deeper and more numerous than you'll get in a 10-minute YouTube video, a YouTube history channel, which are entertaining but not necessarily deep. And it goes deeper than a Wikipedia article. Sure. And I think that some of the sources I use offer some surprising insights. So that's why it's the Cold War Vault.
Right.
Going to the vault.
That makes perfect sense. Okay, well, today we're going to discuss one of my favorite movies, and I know I say that every time, but that's because, hey, if I'm going to review movies, they might as well be my favorites. This week, we're talking about the movie Threads from Great Britain. For those of you who haven't seen it, you really, if you're into any of this World War III stuff, it's an absolute must-watch at least once, and for a lot of people, only once. I think I'm a bit of a glutton for punishment because I watch this thing, every couple of years. I can't help myself. It's a sickness. This is the movie that might best be known as the British Day After. It came out the following year in 1984, and it was a very similar circumstance where we took Middle America and blew that up in Kansas City. They blew up. It was Sheffield in the United Kingdom. So their tale is a little more urban, and they don't have a lot of farmland in this. But it's very British, and so I really do think it's apt to call it the British Day After, but it really does stand on its own as a movie. So just because that gives you an idea of what it's like, it really doesn't do it complete justice. And actually, it was Dr. Kinney's experience with this film that made me, when I started doing movie reviews, actually, and let me go back and say, it was his World War III movie reviews where he had this amazing style where he took, the chronology of World War III and then talked about a subsection of movies and how that section was represented. So kind of like how I have my geopolitical buildup. That's an example of something we're going to talk about. He would go through a dozen movies and sort of explain what that was like and how the movie handled it. And I thought that was a really good way to go through a movie review, and it actually almost kept me from doing any movie reviews because I thought that was way cooler than anything I was going to come up with. So
Thanks.
so yeah, then one of the things in talking about World War III and movies and all, you actually told the story of your introduction to this movie, and I was wondering if you could share that with us.
Oh, sure. Yes. The I was exposed to this film when it was shown in the United States in 1985. I'm not sure, yeah, how in depth we should go. If you want the whole story, I think I'd go through it in the Cold War Vault. But in short, it was aired on Superstation TBS, Ted Turner's Superstation TBS. Ted Turner was a big anti-nuclear activist, and so devoted a day to this film, no commercials. And it just so happened that my parents left the room for some reason. I was pretty young. My parents left the room for some reason and left it on, and it looked somewhat educational, so they didn't see a big problem. And I sort of watched the world disintegrate in a post nuclear hellscape before they came back into the room. And I sort of swallowed that down for a while and didn't really think about it. But I definitely had some form of post-traumatic stress disorder from seeing this film as a very young child. I came across the VHS cassette years later. I was in high school, came across it. I said, this kind of looks familiar. And I was always into movies like that for some reason. And I came across this, took it home, watched it, and immediately had this explosive emotional reaction because I realized this was the reason that I had spent my childhood afraid of nuclear weapons and obsessed, indeed afraid of, and that usually or it often goes hand in hand with being obsessed. I was obsessed with Cold War history and nuclear weapons, and so I credit the film with probably changing the course of my professional career. Well, I watched that, and then I realized that I'd been exposed to that all those years before, and after that, it was all history all the time for the rest of my professional, academic, and professional life.
That's
That's a
fantastic. And so you're professing now.
pardon.
You're a professor right now, right? Are you giving instruction or?
The last I taught was at Marquette University, but after that, I've gone to doing consultancy and the podcast and trying to develop some of this media, this little miniature media empire.
Okay.
It's very miniature,
Yeah,
but I'm trying.
I know the feeling. Okay. Well, from my perspective, again, I watched the day after when it came out on TV. We sat down as a family. We watched it. I grew up in a military family, and that it was. I was a bit older than you. I was in sort of late elementary school, and it definitely had a profound effect. But I was always told, there was always whispers, as I was growing up. Oh, you haven't seen the British have one that's even worse. It's just it's way bleaker. And so I remember hearing about it, and it was like rumors almost. And I was actually a full grown adult before I saw it. I didn't see it until probably about 8 or 9 years ago. it popped up on, I don't even remember where, probably Vimeo or something like that. Somebody had pirated a copy or something. And I watched it, from beginning to end, and it was everything that anybody ever said it was. I was really really impressed with what they put together. And each time I see it, I'm still impressed by the way it was constructed, the way that they tell the story. I have a couple of critiques. It's not the perfect movie. For one, I feel silly saying this, but maybe all British people look alike, because I had a real hard time telling who some of the characters were. So you'd see a guy show up later, and you're like, "Wait a second, is that? Hold on." So,
Yeah.
so I think that I've probably lost some of the effectiveness of the film by trying to figure out who's who. Um, but no, I actually think they did a great job with it. And so for all of the movies that we've been reviewing, we go through a couple of different categories. The first one is the geopolitical buildup. So, what caused the war to start? The next one is the war in narrative. Now, because most of these are fairly low budget movies, or in this case, a TV movie, they're going to explain the war a lot more than they're going to show the war. And so you get a lot of war in narrative. The third category is the visual war. That is, okay, how did they take their limited budget and kind of give you the visual effects? And then finally, we have the aftermath, which is what happens after the war. And this movie's very different than most of the other ones, because over half of it deals with the aftermath. Typically, with a lot of these movies, you're looking at maybe 10, 15 minutes of digging out. But and then finally, the tropes. Just what are the things that you just have to have in one of these movies? And usually they're quirky and sometimes funny, sometimes not. But those are kind of the categories. And so we'll start with the geopolitical buildup. This one is kind of similar to, I believe it was Countdown to Looking Glass, in that it really starts in Iran. So there is a coup in Iran. And so we have to assume it's the Ayatollah gets deposed and there's new leadership. If that sounds familiar, then you might be thinking of 1952, when kind of a similar situation took place with Mossadegh. The Russians, or the Soviets rather, they do what they do, and they accuse the CIA of doing what they did. And so they use this as a pretense to send troops into Mashhad over through Turkmenistan, or actually rather the Turkmen SSR. And that's really kind of the opening move there, and it's going to reverberate through the rest of the world. But this is kind of our flashpoint. So when you're looking at the Cold War, Dr. Kinney, and especially, I'd say actually even to narrow it down to say, the time that was the late 70s to the mid 80s, where do you think Iran stands as kind of a flashpoint? How likely?
Well, there was a significant popular perception of the events in Iran, especially because of the revolution and the hostage crisis, 79 to 80. And so it was an interesting way for the filmmakers to go, because previously it would have been Berlin. I think we'll organically figure out how to talk about the war game 1965-66 at some point. But every flashpoint for these kinds of earlier films was Berlin. But Berlin was in a kind of a stasis. It wasn't exciting or interesting. But in the early 1980s, the Middle East seemed an exceptionally dangerous place. The Iranian Revolution, but also the 79 invasion of Afghanistan by the Soviets.
That's right.
So the Soviets were in the region actively and having a very difficult time of it. And so these little conflicts were popping up. So I think it's a really interesting way to go. Of course, there was also the Iran-Iraq war,
That's right.
and so this was sort of the new battlefield in the minds of the public, and I think it was smart and really interesting. If you're going to have to create a narrative about the cause of the war, then yeah, it's really interesting.
Yep.
Could it have been in real life, like as a counterfactual uh, history? Yes, because we just saw conflict for years thereafter, and it did always have to do with backing at that time the two ideological sides between Iran and Iraq, uh, and the Soviets and the United States. One is a so a social and political conflict, and the other is a religious conflict. So every reason to believe that would be a flashpoint for global struggle.
Yeah, when I was watching the movie again for this review, I did actually think to myself for the first time, hey, wait a minute. They didn't even mention the Iraqis. So we're sending in our two airborne divisions, and what the Iraqis are just minding their own business. So I thought that was interesting, but at the same time, it would just distract from the central focus of the movie. So I didn't give them any demerits for it. I thought it was definitely interesting.
It has to be on, in the television, in the pub, and on the radio, in the car. It
Right.
has to be in the various headlines uh, that are seen throughout. Jimmy's younger sister delivers newspapers in the film. So it has to be there or it doesn't make any sense. And so somebody has to come up with a plausible architecture for the end of the world. And I
That's
think
right.
that's as good as any, especially if you'd like to move it beyond the tensions in Berlin.
Right. And that's kind of interesting because when they did the day after, it was Berlin. That was the flashpoint. They closed Berlin and NATO invaded, and then everything just went to hell. So okay, well the Soviets come in Mashan, and they set up a base there. The U.S. sends them an ultimatum, says you need to get the hell out, or we're gonna send some troops over. Gets a little bit hairy because we lose the USS Los Angeles. It just goes missing on a routine intelligence mission. And I'm here to tell you there was nothing. Okay, look, I'm not telling any secrets, okay, but there was nothing routine about whatever the hell that ship was doing off the coast of Iran. So I thought that was interesting. But then this one blows my mind. The Kirov, which is the largest surface combatant, if you're not counting carriers and amphibians or amphibious assault ships, largest surface combatant since World War II, runs into the USS Callahan. Okay, well, I guess the Callahan might have run into Kirov. Either way, they collided. And if you're a super nerd on the military hardware side, this might be funny to you because the USS Callahan was one of the 4 Kidd class destroyers that was supposed to go to Iran. So that was supposed to be one of the Shah's destroyers, but when the Ayatollah took over, we said, "Yeah, we'll go ahead and keep it." So I thought that was a kind of I don't know if that was intentional or just coincidence, but I did think
I
that was pretty funny.
I did not know that. That is very funny. I I would tend to think it was not intentional, but who knows?
Yeah, they just opened up their copy of Jane's Fighting Ships and
Right.
found a suitable destroyer.
No,
Um,
excellent.
So once one with the missing submarine and the surface combatants hitting each other, the U.S. finally does decide to do this, and for this is the kind of thing that I'm not allowed to do. I don't want to do, but that is make up a unit that doesn't exist, and that is so. This is one of those things where this is so important for my genre and what I write, but who 98% of the people that are going to watch this movie don't really care. I guess that's it. 98% of the people that watch this movie don't care that there's no such thing as the U.S. 10th Airborne Division, but 98% of the people that read my book do care. So So it's funny when I was writing this down, when I was kind of taking notes, I was like, okay, and then we send the 82nd in, and I was watching it, and I went, oh no, I've just been translating that in my head every time. Um, but be that here nor there, we send in an airborne division and start setting up defensive positions to keep the Soviets out of the oil fields, because at the end of the day, this is a political fight. It's a clash of civilizations, but it's also a resource grab. Right now the U.S. has, well, actually, by this point we don't really have very much control over it because it was the Ayatollah. Oh, right, but we deposed the Ayatollah, so we're trying to get access to the oil fields, and the Soviets are basically using, the allegation that we deposed the Shah, or I'm sorry, deposed the Ayatollah, so that they can get access to the oil fields. So it's just really fascinating to me how it can be two things at once like that.
The sorry, I should have muted it. Well, it's not morning drive time radio. My fault. The yeah, it's absolutely important. I think also for that period, it just fits in with what I said before. I don't want to. I didn't want to say this because it does sound so cynical, but it is about resources. It is about the oil, and that would play out over the real history of the region and military conquest in the region over the following decades. It is it is about that, though they never make it they never. And I do think this is important because I do think it would seem too cynical. Just an aside, they never seem to construct an argument or claim that the nuclear annihilation of Western civilization is because of oil. And it was maybe a gentle balance, or maybe others feel differently.
Yeah, I mean, it's really in the entirety of the film, there's only one reference to the oil fields, and it's specifically with regards to what the airborne division is doing. So since the Soviets are coming over with armored forces, we're sending over a light infantry. What are they doing? Okay, well now we know they're just going to try to we're not going to try to push the Russians out. We're just going to keep them from moving any further in. But then they now this is the U.S. accusing them, so I don't know what evidence they would present, but the Americans accuse the Soviets of moving nuclear weapons into Iran, and this is seen as kind of the next escalation. And I remember the first time that I was watching this, I remembered thinking, well, that's a very little use. I don't understand what benefit the Soviets think they're going to get out of stationing tactical missiles. It didn't occur to me at the time until obviously you get to it in the movie that it's actually nuclear tipped SAMs, so surface to air missiles. So that's really that really is an escalation. Mm-hmm. Okay, and then right after, as soon as we accuse them of sending nukes to Mashhad, the Soviets, they forward deploy along the German border, and then they shut down they shut down Berlin. So now we've gotten to that point, and now it's it started in Iran, but it's getting very real for everybody. In fact, once that happens, I think it's only a day or two before the U.S. issues a deadline. They basically have an ultimatum with a deadline, and they say, all right, get out or we're going to push you out. And so when the deadline passes, we immediately move from the geopolitical background to the war and narrative.